Welcome back. I'm Pat Maloney with my esteemed colleague Chip Martin, talking about the week that was and the week that will be at London City Hall. One of the bigger stories this week, Chip, was methadone clinics, and I was there until 1 a.m. last night at a public meeting about a methadone clinic on Warncliffe Road near Old South. Of particular note because it's the first methadone clinic application since the city put in place all these rules about where these clinics can be located. This one was approved. You used to live in that neighborhood?
Not far from that neighborhood, and it's always when you set new rules and you have the first case or the first incident involving new rules, everyone's got to learn their way. And tell me about your experience. Are you bright-eyed and bushy-tailed today after hearing and enlightened about methadone?
Pretty tired, pretty cranky, and also a little bit disappointed. I wouldn't say the majority of people, but a fair number of them who spoke at this public meeting, who I presume are from the neighborhood, were making comments that really surprised me, comparing the doctors who dispense methadone to drug pushers. One person said, as far as I'm concerned, you're licensing another drug dealer in my neighborhood, and actually got a round of applause for that comment, which it suggested to me what I think most people already know, that methadone's maybe misunderstood as a medication. All that being said, the planning committee did endorse it by a 3-1 vote. Dale Henderson, the only opposed, and I believe what Dale was trying to say was he opposed it because these are this model where clinics dispense methadone comes down from an edict from the health ministry, and city council should make their own rules, bucking the provincial health ministry. I think that's what he was saying, which I'm not so sure about that, but at any rate, it was a 3-1 approval or endorsement, now goes on to council for final vote.
Now the interesting thing here, Pat, is that had the committee and council turned down this outright, they would be subject to legal action. They've been warned, and even with approving it with a limit of 200, they've been warned about legal action. So could you explain that? I mean, that's
what's sort of most interesting about it, because the province has set up this model but has not put a limit on how many patients each clinic can see. The city has decided, after setting these rules up, and they spent a year studying that and setting up these zoning rules, they've now decided, well, we'll put a limit of 200 on this particular clinic. And like I said, city planning has done a lot of work, and they're very, very careful with how they handle methadone clinics. I can't see them doing something flying by the seat of their pants. So they've obviously have got legal advice from staff, and they feel very comfortable that even if this is challenged, that it is legally defensible, this cap of 200. If that is in fact legally defensible, I think your problems are solved, because all the land use conflicts, all the neighborhood conflicts, it's all about volume. The clinic near Beale that has caused so much consternation around there, just by way of contrast.
4 times as many.
4 times as many.
Yeah.
It's up to 800 a day.
Yeah.
If you're looking at 200, if that cap can be put in place and be kept there, and it's
interesting, though, the city's trying to find a way to move forward, and they're required to do so, but here we are where if they yield to citizen input, and I can expect the citizen input you saw last night will be the same sort of citizen input we'll see all over the city with respect to these things, because of the lack of knowledge about what methadone clinics are, and the fact of litigation, potential litigation. I mean, this is something that is a can of worms that I suspect is going to be opened repeatedly around the city, and it may ultimately be resolved in a higher court than City Council. Yeah,
and I would add to that too. I agree with you that there's that potential, but the City of London is the first community in Ontario that's done anything like this. Of course, the province can't be bothered worrying about the issues that they've created, so it's up to the City of London Planning Department. So in a sense, as John Fleming, the city planner, said, they're trailblazing here, and I'm curious to see how this cap goes. I would be really surprised if John Fleming and the Planning Department would put a cap in place that wasn't legally defensible. I wouldn't be surprised if it was challenged, but I'd be surprised if they didn't do a lot of homework before they did put it in place.
And it may be upheld at the end of the day in a court, but in the meantime, being a trailblazer may have costs for the City of London in terms of litigation.
Right, sure. So also happening this week, not so much a City Hall story, but I suppose there are implications for the city, is Dalton McGuinty resigning. Who will be the new Liberal leader? Will Chris Bentley and/or Deb Matthews, the two London Liberal MPPs, run for the leadership? What do you think, Chip? Do you think that they'll run?
I think they both harbor ambitions. I think they would both be good candidates. It remains to be seen. There are other candidates that are mulling it over. The pedigree of Deb Matthews particularly is very strongly Liberal, has been for a long time. She's handled a very tough ministry. Chris Bentley has had Attorney General and now Ministry of Energy. Been a tough portfolio with energy and the contempt hearings. Both haven't caved, although I don't know why anyone would want the pressure of being a premier, but people have political ambitions, and I think they'd make good candidates. But there's going to be, I think, a large field.
I thought it was interesting, too. I got to talk to Joan Smith this week, who was Solicitor General with David Peterson, and she's from London, of course, and she and her husband, Don Smith, were major Liberal fundraisers, and I presume still are. And she said that she's thought about this before. If it's Chris, if it's Deb, who would I back? And she's going to back Deb. I thought that was interesting, and it was kind of nice to talk to her.
I think even if both of them ran, they're such good friends, and their support is wide enough that if one falters, they would put the support behind the other.
So if you were going to put, like Greg Van Moorsel, our editor, says he's predicting Sandra Pupatello to win. Do you have a sort of a prediction?
I don't know. My crystal ball isn't as good as Greg's.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
Is anybody's?
But it's still an interesting, it's going to be fun to watch to see how it plays out.
I think it's going to be very interesting. And then once installed, the new Premier of Ontario is going to have so much on his or her plate. And do the Conservatives have enough horsepower and enough political clout after all this to toss them out? Or will the NDP come up the middle? That's going to be an equally interesting story.
Okay, also this week, going back to City Hall, Councillor Stephen Orser made an interesting suggestion that...
Yet another one?
Yet another one.
He has a few. Did this involve chickens?
No chickens, but it involved banning Twitter use during council meetings and potentially banning internet access from the council chambers. And this is 2012. We've been using this technology fairly widely, I would say, for about 15 years now. The internet, that is. Twitter, we're probably 3 or 4 years into its wide use. I don't know. It didn't get anywhere, but Steve was certainly passionate about it. And
well, he does get passionate about issues, and I can't imagine why anyone would want to do anything that would keep council members more in the dark than they already are.
Right. But part of what I thought, but if you were to put in a scrambler, this was I'm not even sure what that is, but his suggestion of a scrambler to block the internet access. That means members of the public can't use the internet. That means that
reporters
that
are filing their stories,
journalists, capital J journalists can't use the internet. City staff can't use the internet.
Bloggers,
lowercase b bloggers. They can't use the internet. And I mean, just the idea itself seemed a little bit.
It's a little ill-considered.
Yeah, it was ill-conceived, and he was upset because someone had created a Twitter account mocking him, which has about 50 followers, and we spoke afterward, and he said, you know, it's a very small following for this account, and it's not particularly funny either, so I don't expect it to get it.
Well, I suspect that politicians need a thick skin, and perhaps Steve needs a little bit thickening. Well, quite frankly, I don't pay much attention to what people happen to say about other people on Twitter, but that's just
I know
me.
you don't, and I think that's a good idea, because a lot of it is blather. Okay, also, there was planning this week where they talked about 199 Queens, which is a Shmuel Farhi-owned building. He wants to knock it down.
Yeah, and this week I reached him in California. He wanted to knock down this building, which is built in the 1870s. It's an Italianate building on property he owns. It's right beside a municipal parking lot. Shmuel Farhi wants to, who's known for, he owns 50 or 60 buildings in the downtown of London. Not really known as a developer, but he's talking about knocking this building down because it's in the way of a parking garage that would go with his high-rise that he's proposing, and he showed some nice designs. I reached him in California, actually in Pebble Beach of all places. I don't know if he was golfing or not, but he indicated that for the first time that this thing would be 24 to 30 stories tall, which would make it the tallest building in London if in fact he builds it. It would be comprised of an awful lot of parking on the lower levels in order to address the shortfall of parking in the city. Wouldn't have any office complex because we're already something like 700,000 square feet vacant right now, and then residential on top of it. This is a $50 million project he's talking about. A number of people are they've seen the drawings, and they've seen heard what what he's talking about, and it could be very interesting if it comes to fruition. Council or the committee was reluctant to approve the demolition of this thing unless they can be guaranteed that something will be built on the site, but they have no legal ability to pass any sort of resolution that says we'll give you a demolition permit, which they agreed to do, but we insist that it be tied to construction on the site. So
they can't do that.
They can't do that.
Right.
So we'll have to wait and see.
And heritage types are not actively trying to save the building.
Not particularly. The local architectural advisory committee agrees that the building had been added on to too much. It had been compromised over the years.
It's not a pretty looking building.
Not particularly. It's had a rough life.
There's lots of skepticism that Shmuel will indeed build this building, or will he just turn this thing into a parking lot? But my question is, how can a person who's publicly known like Shmuel publicly come out and say exactly what you said, 24 to 30 stories, and then turn around and say, on second thought, I'm not building anything? I mean, it seems to me that he's committed himself to it. He's publicly committed himself to it.
Market conditions can change, financing can change, the landscape can change in many ways more than the physical landscape. So it sounds like a good project. It looks like a good project, but we'll have to see if, in fact, it will be a project. As they say, time will tell, Pat.
I guess so. And then there was also another matter that came up, population projections, right?
Yeah, they were some months ago. The mayor took to task this consulting company that came in with an estimate that London will continue to grow at about 1% in population a year going forward, and an assessment. And he got quite upset about that and said that they should be looking at, we're trying to reach 2%, so that they should be working with a 2% number. Well, they have to deal with real numbers because these are the basis of servicing studies and of official plans and all those sorts of things. So the numbers, they need very good, accurate forecasts. The consulting group came back and said, we're sticking with our just under 1% scenario, but we will acknowledge that a 2% scenario could be achievable if you were to create something in the order of 6,300 jobs, I think it is, a year for each year for the next 10 years or whatever it is. And so they acknowledge the fact that if, in fact, city efforts to attract new business and jobs are successful, this is the number of jobs you have to reach in order to get a 2% growth rate. Very interesting, and in that report they also indicated something that sort of caught me by surprise, that the birth rate is slated to increase. Sounds like more Londoners are staying home, and that our immigration, not going out on the town so much, I don't know, and our immigration is continuing to fuel that, and that we will be seeing a continued reasonably good demand for single-family housing, for instance, in London.
But that idea, that 1% population growth, just to put it in context for people, that's a pretty sickly growth rate, is it not?
It's anemic. It's anemic. It's like treading water, basically. If your revenues are increasing 1% as a city in terms of taxes, you're falling behind, actually, because the cost of living and the inflation and all those things are increasing more than 1%. So
those are two different things. That's population, then you got assessment growth.
And assessment growth.
But we're at assessment growth about 1.2% over the last 20 years. So that is also a sickly number, you would say?
Yeah, I would say, compared to comparator cities like KW, so we're better off, I believe, than Windsor, but anywhere in the GTA is doing much better than that. We are still, treading water and trailing the pack.
I see. Well, thanks, Chip. And
it's been an incredible pleasure, Patrick. Right, we should do this again sometime, but we just don't know when.
That's right. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.